Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate Sega CD review here on Player One Start. Today we're finally going to wrap up, for the most part, the Sega CD add-on for the Sega Genesis. And if this is your first time here, or you're just realizing that this is the end of the series, don't forget that there were other parts that preceded this video, so if you want to go back and watch them before this video, you are more than welcome to, or you can watch them after this video is over. This video has been a long time in the making. It's actually been amazing how much I've been able to go through the Sega CD's game library. In this video, we are going to finish up the last game genre that was defined by Sega's president and CEO in North America. And this game genre was not really well defined, as it is called games that defy definition. Let's go ahead and take a look at these. Looking at this last genre as described by Sega, this genre seems to include anything that only offers interactive experiences and not really much gameplay. However, this genre was not really described much further, but I feel that it would include things like Compton's interactive Encyclopedia here. This is not really a game, but it is an interactive experience where you're able to look up information and find pictures of items. This would be in the days before the internet would take over. In fact, this is not only one of the first encyclopedias to be offered on CD-ROM, it would most likely be the first that many people actually owned, as this was released for a variety of platforms. But again, most people didn't have a computer with a CD-ROM drive on it. While I would have loved to have something like this researching projects back in the day, I don't think this has much value other than nostalgia when viewed in the present. The same can also be said with the San Diego Zoo Presents The Animals, a true multimedia experience. Now that's a phrase that's not really said too often anymore either, is the phrase multimedia. This basically referred to something that happens on almost every webpage we visit, but multimedia referred to things that were not only text-based but also could provide images, video, and audio. Again, this was at a time where that wasn't really commonplace in terms of software. But again, this is more of the educational variety and not much of a game. And since the audio visuals don't really hold up and the information is most probably out of date by now, this is another title that could be skipped over. But when thinking of other titles that could fit this genre, I think that some of the point-and-click adventure games could possibly be in here as well. In fact, to further support this claim, the developer of this game is called Sega's Multimedia Studio. But there is an element of gameplay added into this. The plot is set after the events of the 1993 film. A group of scientists are sent to collect dinosaur eggs at Jurassic Park. After the group's helicopter crashes on the island, a survivor, controlled by the player, receives a video message from a computer expert, and then the game begins. As stated before, this is a point-and-click adventure game with a strong emphasis on action sequences which require split-second timing. The player must search the island to retrieve eggs from 7 different dinosaur species and place them in an incubator at the Jurassic Park Visitor Center. All of this must be collected within a real-time 12-hour time limit. As a point-and-click adventure title, I think this game stands up to somewhere around the average mark. But as a Jurassic Park game in the mid-1990s, this game would have been abysmal. Especially considering that most other adaptations of this movie were action and adventure games. And I don't know if it was just me, but I was expecting this game to be an upgraded port of the Sega Genesis game, which is actually very good. I can only assume that many kids out there at the time would have thought the same. Still, if you're a fan of these games from the early 90s and the point-and-click genre, I think this one is one that you should check out, and you'll be especially more interested in it if you're a fan of the Jurassic Park franchise. Now, when looking at these games, I actually didn't expect to come across a title that would be nostalgic from my own childhood, but this game is. This is the secret of Monkey Island, which was a point-and-click graphic adventure video game developed and published by Lucasfilm Games. It takes place in a fictional version of the Caribbean during the age of piracy. The player assumes the role of Guybrush Threepwood, a young man who dreams of becoming a pirate and explores fictional islands while solving puzzles. Due to frustrations with other adventure games of the time, the game developers made the player's death almost impossible to happen, which helped focus players on the goal of exploration. This game was the 5th game built with the famous Scum engine, which was first developed for Maniac Mansion. However, it was heavily modded to include a more friendly user interface. When this game was initially released for PCs, it received critical acclaim for its humor, audio visuals, and gameplay. This port is based on the 1992 VGA re-release for the game, which was meant for IBM PC compatibles. It features an updated interface and CD audio soundtrack. But with a single-speed CD-ROM drive, the Sega CD conversion had much longer load times, which affect every transition in the game. An interesting side note is that this game also removes the infamous stump joke from older versions of the game. Basically, there was a tree stump in the forest maze which can be examined. Eventually, the game would ask for disc 22, then 36, then 114 to be inserted. After which, he says he'll have to skip that part of the game as these game discs didn't actually exist. The original game shipped on 8 5¼ floppy disks. When this game was initially released, Lucasfilm Games were bombarded with phone calls and letters by confused players thinking they could not access part of the game. So possibly for that reason, and the fact that everything fit on one CD-ROM, that was actually removed from the game. This game does not support the CD backup RAM cart, meaning a 4-digit password system was used to access later parts of the game. This system is limited and does not keep track of the player's location, minor items, and decisions that have been made. Overall, this is actually a pretty good port of this game, and I found it very nostalgic to go back to, although I did find the loading times to be a bit irritating, and of course I would prefer to play this with an actual mouse. But it is still perfectly playable with the Sega Genesis controller. The Adventures of Willy Beamish is a graphic adventure video game that was published in 1991 by Sierra Online. The player takes control of 9-year-old Willy Beamish in a game that somewhat parodies the adventure genre. The game pioneered the use of in-game graphics drawn to resemble classic hand-drawn cartoon animation. While it was initially released for the MS-DOS and Commodore Amiga computers, it was ported to the Sega CD in 1993. This game starts out with Willy Beamish being sent to detention on the last day of school. The player is given the choice to either evade detention or wait it out. Either way, Willy returns home to his family after that. Many of the challenges presented in this game are typical choices that a 9-year-old boy must make. For example, whether to push his little sister on the swing set or how high to push her, whether to wash his dad's car, and whether to take his dog out for a walk. Making unwise choices can produce negative consequences. For instance, if Willy does not wash his father's car, he does not receive his allowance. And then he also can't buy things that he will need later in the game. This version for the Sega CD was noted for having slow loading times and slightly washed out colors due to the hardware limitations of the system. However, in an effort to make up for the slow loading times, the game has a feature where the player can select the start button and manipulate a set of twirling black and white balls known as manual laser balls. This edition also features a minigame on Willy's Atari system in his bedroom. The minigame combines various elements from Space Invaders, Tetris, and Arkanoid. While some might view this game as a bit charming, I didn't actually really care for it much, but I think that's because I'm playing this game for the first time as an adult. It is very oriented towards kids, and the voice acting is, well, let's just say poor to be kind, but I think it would be more humorous for kids.
None of your business. What do you mean, none of my business? Just for that, I'm gonna beat the crap out of you. Hey man, just kidding.
Panic is a puzzle point-and-click video game developed by Sega. and this one is a bit on the childish end as well. Interestingly, this is one of the few Sega CD games that supports the Sega mouse. This again fits this genre as not really being a game, and to tell you the truth, I think this game would be much more enjoyable if I was a kid playing this back in the mid-90s. As I don't really enjoy it now, I actually don't really get the point of this game. I think it's just set up to be a game where you click and wacky things happen. And last of the games that I own that kind of fit this genre of not really being a game is My Paint, the animated paint program. This was developed and published by Saddleback Graphics and Bridgestone Multimedia in 1993 for the Sega CD. And I guess I can blame the mere existence of this game only on one other product, and that is Mario Paint for the Super Nintendo. It appears as if this game was designed to compete directly with that game only, as it doesn't really offer much more than that game, and of course, due to nostalgia's sake, I think I'm going to say that I enjoy that game better. The only review of this game I could find at the time of its release is actually in a UK magazine, which is strange because this game never was released outside of the US. But they basically said that they couldn't classify it as a game at all, and didn't really comment on its potential except for maybe something for the kids to color on, rather than using an actual piece of paper and a marker. They did note that since there is no way to save what you create, they recommended plugging in the Sega CD into a VCR so that you could record it and save it for later. Which I guess is kind of what I did. So yeah, I don't know if I saved the best games for last, but I really don't think I did in this case because most of these aren't even games at all. I really do enjoy some games like these, but for things like Compton's Interactive Encyclopedia and The Animals, those are just kind of niche titles that I don't think is going to have a wide appeal, especially to gamers today. But for games like Secret of Monkey Island, I think that is actually probably one of my favorite point-and-click adventure games of all time, even still to this day. I especially find the Secret of Monkey Island very nostalgic because this is the game that I used to play a lot on Windows 95. And yes, getting it to work on Windows 95 was half of the fun. I guess I say fun, but it's kind of annoying getting MS-DOS games to work on Windows 95 machines, but it's something that I remember fondly now that I'm older, because that was something I used to have to deal with all the time. But to tell you the truth, I think I actually might prefer the version on the Sega CD now, or at least on game consoles now, because of how easy it is to get it set up and running. All you need to do is insert the game disc and turn the console on. No configuring drivers, changing video modes, audio cards, it's just all there. And yeah, I do find the lack of a mouse to be a little bit annoying, but it's something I got used to quite quickly, and I was able to relive a lot of fond memories with this game on the Sega CD. Alright, but now that we've wrapped up the gameplay portion of this review, let's go ahead and take a look at its legacy and how it's remembered today before I tell you my thoughts on it. The Sega CD ended up being a success for Sega in a couple of ways. First, they actually outsold their rival, selling almost 2.24 million units in the limited life cycle of this accessory. And second, the Sega CD was successful in placating home video game console owners by having the cutting edge in home video game technology before the next system was ready to be released. However, the Sega CD saw a sharp decline as soon as announcements of that console came to light. And going forward in the future, Sega would eventually put all of their resources into that console, while still allowing the Sega Genesis base system to serve as a budget console, as there was still a huge customer base for that system. The Sega CD did have different variations throughout its life cycle, one of them and most notably being the JVC-XI system, also known as the Wonder Mega in other parts of the world. This system did not sell as well without Sega's brand name on it, however it was able to play both Sega Genesis cartridges and play Sega CD games all in one unit.
Encyclopedia. Hey, it's a CD player, plus you get stuff for free. So now it's see what you can do when you apply yourself? One mind, one machine. XI, multi-entertainment system. Call 1-800-JVC-XI.
The best-selling variation of the Sega CD was the Model 2 add-on for the Model 2 Sega Genesis. This was most likely due to this console being cheaper and also more reliable than the Model 1. However, I think my favorite variation of this console is the Sega CD-X, which offered not only the Sega Genesis and Sega CD in one unit, but also doubling its purpose as a portable CD player as well. However, due to its high price at the time, this system did not sell well, and due to its rarity today, it is also very high in price.
The Simpsons is brought to you by 3DO, the most advanced home gaming system in the universe. What are you playing with?
As early as 1993, with the introduction of the 3DO Interactive Multiplayer, it basically rendered the Sega CD technically obsolete and sharply reduced the public interest. And possibly as a result of that, in late 1993, less than a year after the Sega CD's launch in North America and in Europe, the media started reporting that Sega was no longer accepting in-house development proposals for the Mega CD in Japan. This news was a major blow to the public image of the Sega CD, as that announcement was pretty much interpreted as Sega of Japan walking away from the add-on. Sega of America, however, would continue not only to invest into heavy advertising for the system, but they would also become the #1 developer for games for the Sega CD altogether. This would further increase the divide between the agendas of Sega of America and Sega of Japan. In early 1995, Sega shifted its focus to the Sega Saturn and discontinued advertising for Genesis hardware, including the Sega CD. Sega would officially discontinue the Sega CD in the first quarter of 1996, saying that it needed to concentrate on fewer platforms, and felt the Sega CD could not compete due to its high price and outdated single-speed drive. The last games scheduled to be released for the Sega CD were Myst and Braid Dead 13. However, those were eventually cancelled. Looking back on the Sega CD, the reception of it is very mixed. Some praised certain games, but others criticized its low value for its money and limitations on the benefits it actually provides to the Genesis. This is listed as one of the worst-selling video game consoles of all time. However, I feel that is a bit of a misnomer, as this is really an add-on and enhancement to the console rather than its own standalone console. Reviewer Blake Snow from GamePro noted that the problem with the Sega CD was threefold. The device was expensive at $299. It arrived a bit late into the 16-bit life cycle, so some people didn't want to waste their money on a console that was going to be quickly obsolete when they already had other options such as the 3DO and eventually the Neo Geo CD that was also released in this life cycle, or they can just wait a couple of years for the next gen to begin. And it didn't really do much to enhance the gameplay experience, other than enhancing graphics and sound. However, I feel the biggest nail in the coffin for the Sega CD was the lack of support from Sega. The poor support of the Sega CD has often been criticized as the first link in the devaluation of Sega's brand. In terms of its game library, critics note that the game quality is all over the place, with many critics noting that possibly the greatest Sonic game of all time was released for the add-on, but then you also had a variety of other games that are just junk throwaway titles, with some stating that if you wanted to look for most of the worst games released during the 16-bit generation, one doesn't need to go much farther than the Sega CD library. However, in terms of nostalgia, those that grew up with this system, while limited in number, do fondly look back on this add-on as a moment in time where game add-ons that could increase the capabilities of your current game console was a viable concept and provided a fun and entertaining experience. When I was researching ways that the Sega CD has been remembered by gamers and fans of the console, it's kind of divided. A lot of people say that they like the games on the Sega CD, and that all of the people who say that there was nothing but garbage released for the console don't know what they're talking about, and you need to try this out now. On the other side, I see a lot of people who say that there were only junk titles released for it, the games that people say are worth it aren't really worth it, and no one should be collecting this console. The only praise I see that's very common on this console is the Sonic CD game, and games like Snatcher, maybe Lords of Thunder thrown in there, but there's not really a lot of consensus on a lot of these other titles. But where do I fall in all of these different perspectives? Well, I think that the Sega CD was designed at a time where it needed to be on the cutting edge, it needed to extend the life cycle of the Sega Genesis, and make it technically superior to all of its other competition. The Sega CD was actually designed to compete with the TurboGrafx CD, actually more aptly, the PC Engine Super CD Duo or whatever it is. But another advantage to this accessory in North America is that it was going to get the jump on Nintendo yet again by releasing their peripheral before Nintendo could release theirs. So that's where I really think that this product really shined and would have been most relevant. I don't think it is as relevant today in gaming history as it was back then when people were trying to be on the cutting edge. A lot of the games that I enjoyed on this system are also available on either other platforms or even as a cartridge on the Sega Genesis. And yes, I do appreciate the upgraded graphics and the upgraded sound especially, but I don't really know if it's worth it today to get that upgrade anymore because really people are looking for the more retro feel. And in that case, if you are, you're going to be looking for games that are maybe a little bit more primitively designed. I think the biggest drawback to it today is its price. Obviously, I felt it was worth it once to collect this, and I kind of saw myself as a bit of a casual collector back when I bought this piece. But again, in modern times, when I was researching how this console is priced these days, it is astronomical compared to what value it's going to add to your Sega Genesis. So in a way, we've kind of come back full circle. It has a lot of good games for it, and it does have a lot of games that were kind of junky that don't live up today, but I think what really holds me back from recommending it for others to collect is the fact that it's going to fit a niche market, and the price is too high. It's strange that we've actually come back to that point, because if this thing was down to around the price of what it costs to collect a Sega Genesis, I would definitely recommend it. I mean, it's worth it for that alone. And I was not expecting to find a bunch of great titles on here, some of which are exclusive to the Sega CD. When I bought this console, I was looking for a couple of games. I was looking for Sonic CD, and I was looking for Star Wars Rebel Assault. Strangely, that didn't end up being one of my favorite games on this system. It's actually towards one of the lower junky titles. The only draw for me is the fact that it is a Star Wars game, and I guess I'm a sucker for those. So overall, while I do feel that there are some games that could be worth it to collect this accessory, I think that price is going to be the main thing that drives people away from this, and is probably the most influential reason why I would not recommend collecting this console, at least for the casual collector. But anyway, that's just my opinion. What do you all think of this accessory, especially for those of you that grew up with it? I really look forward to seeing what your experiences are on this accessory down in the comments below. But that said, not only does it wrap up this video, this actually wraps up this series on the Ultimate Sega CD review. We've already gone through two different, let's call them phases for this project. We actually went through the Sega Genesis first, then the Sega CD. The Sega CD actually took a bit longer than I thought, as I ended up being able to produce more content than I thought I would for this accessory. And I do want to give a special shout out to a couple of anonymous people who have graciously either loaned me titles or found ways for me to procure these titles at an affordable price for me to be able to showcase them here on this channel. In the third and final phase of this, let's call it the GCU, the Genesis Cinematic Universe, I guess, if I'm going to go off of Marvel terminology there. We are actually going to start taking a look at the final add-on for this system, and that is the Sega 32X. So look forward to those videos coming out to you real soon. But for now, I will say, if you like what you see, please hit that like button, leave a comment below, let you know what you liked about today's video. Don't forget to click on that subscribe button, it really helps me out and supports this channel. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and stay tuned because I have more content coming. I'll see you all in the next one. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.